In Entertainment Week's Ultimate Guide to Avengers, writer Anthony Breznican interviews Thanos actor Josh Brolin, noting the Neanderthal aesthetic of his character. Brolin smartly refocuses the conversation in a different direction. And that's your perception of it. You see this lughead and this guy who you pigeonhole right from the first cosmetic reaction to him. And what I see is this in this guy's eyes. This super intelligence. There's this constant contrasting thing about this Neanderthalic lughead. He's way more intelligent than anybody else in the movie by far. After seeing the movie multiple times now, a single line has struck me as it relates to this film's protagonist, Thanos. After thrusting a jagged piece of the Iron Man suit into Tony Stark's abdomen, Thanos kneels down and tells Stark that he respects him, that Stark isn't the only one burdened with knowledge. For a while, I struggled to figure out just what this movie means. I mean, with a movie this epic and a cast and series of settings this sprawling, finding a coherent theme might not be possible. And I was ready and okay with that. The movie certainly has enough to do without also providing some kind of universal truth about human life, which is what a theme does. But Thanos' line about being burdened by knowledge struck me. I've been listening to the podcast The Bible Project, and as a consequence, have been thinking a lot about the Bible. And then, that sensation of reading any kind of media for meaning happened to me. A synthesis of two disparate things, Thanos' comment on the burden of knowledge, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil from the book of Genesis. Those two concepts suddenly were side by side in my mind. And I had to figure out, okay, is there something here? Is this movie exploring something at the core of the human condition? Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." "You will not surely die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" For the Christian, this is referred to as the fall, the moment when humanity disobeyed God and ate the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Doing so, humanity lost its innocence, not necessarily because the fruit was magical or something, giving Adam and Eve access to forbidden knowledge. Well, in my reading of it anyway. But instead, the very act of believing that they knew what was better for them than God is the actual fall. Adam and Eve believed they knew better, could define their own truths, their own morality, their own nature. And by doing so, they effectively said, "We are a God now." And the rest of human history bears this out in every atrocity. Pastor and writer Timothy Keller, preaching on this moment in Genesis, references Beatrice Webb, an architect of the British welfare system. Beatrice was a socialist, an activist, a British leader. She kept a diary, and in 1925, she went back and looked at her old diary, and she wrote, "In my diary 1890, I wrote, I have staked everything on the essential goodness of human nature." Now, 35 years later, I realize how permanent are the evil impulses and instincts in us, and how little they seem to change, like greed for wealth and power, and how mere social machinery will never change that. We must ask better things from human nature, but will we get a response? No amount of science or knowledge has been of any avail, and unless we curb the bad impulse, how will we get better social institutions? Keller goes on to argue that Webb's shift in perspective of the human condition reveals the truth presented in Genesis. This permanent evil came with the knowledge of good and evil. More specifically, that humanity could independently define what is good and what is evil for themselves. And much like Thanos does, we constrain reality with various systems for defining good and evil. In my English classes, I have students contend with various ethical dilemmas, applying different ethical frameworks to each dilemma. There is utilitarian ethics, or the framework that judges rightness by whether an act produces the most benefit or pleasure for the most people. Someone operating from a utilitarian perspective might ask, what is the act's utility for the most amount of people? And then there is Kantian ethics, named for philosopher Immanuel Kant, whose ethic valued the dignity of each human life for their own sake, not for what their utility might be. Kantian ethics judges rightness based on if the act values individuals based solely on their worth as individuals, not on what they can do. So, for example, to befriend someone at work just to advance your career, this would be wrong according to Kant because the act of friendship used the quote-unquote friend as a means to an end, devaluing their humanity. There are other ethical frameworks, like virtue ethics, that pull from the predefined virtues of various religions or belief systems, too. So, which ethical framework does Thanos act from? Thanos' act to remove half of the universe's life from existence is motivated by a certain concern for the quality of life for every life form on every planet. Throughout the film, we realize that this man is an idealist. He lives outside of reality and acts according to a very specific ideal, the ideal of balance, of a commitment to a certain quality of life that supersedes the very idea that our heroes, especially Captain America, subscribe to, the value of life for life's own sake, or the Kantian ethic. No, for Thanos, life isn't valuable on its own merit, and he is burdened with the knowledge of the problem and his solution. So Thanos seems to be a utilitarian. He values life, but not if it includes suffering. To Gamora, he describes that her people woke up each day with hunger and want. But after he slaughtered half of their population, the planet shines as a paradise, with enough resources for all. So, Thanos values a certain quality of life over life for its own sake. The utility of his act trumps any guilt he might have over killing trillions of lives. His act is an act that benefits trillions, bringing them pleasure and prosperity in the long run. He is truly a utilitarian, and he is an atom. Early in the film, Loki proclaims, "You will never be a god." But didn't he? He took hold of reality and imposed his own truth onto it. He defined reality and what was right and what was wrong in his own eyes. And all those stemmed from the burden of knowledge he gained about sustainability and overpopulation on Titan, his now desolate homeworld. He tried to impose his utilitarian ethic there, but was rejected. So, he took to the stars, roaming from world to world, killing in the justice of his self-generated ethic. Obviously, the Marvel Cinematic Universe isn't going to feature the Judeo-Christian God in this reality-spanning blockbuster. But one could ask, if there is a God, why did he allow Thanos to have access to the power of the Infinity Gauntlet and the Infinity Stones? Why even create the Infinity Stones? Why even provide Thanos the opportunity to warp reality so? Well, because choice and human agency is critical to reality and the shape it takes. In my video essay, Why Doesn't the Ocean Restore the Heart of Te Fiti?, I demonstrate that the ocean could have easily restored the heart itself, washing upon Te Kā as a tidal wave and plugging the heart in its place. But this act of the ocean would prevent Moana and her people from learning about their heritage. It would prevent them from returning to the seas to spread their culture across the globe. It would prevent Maui from earning a restored sense of self, one that is no longer reliant on outward praise and recognition. Yes, the ocean could have restored the heart, which would have transformed Te Kā back into Te Fiti, healing the islands. But the heart and soul of humanity would have been left unchanged. And that is the point. The ocean needed humanity to be involved in the process of restoration. More importantly, they had to choose to act. As a teacher, I've tried to help so many students out of low grades by preemptively offering more work or extending their deadlines, but they rarely took me up on these opportunities to learn and grow. But the ones who came to me, asking for help, choosing to meet with me after school or during lunch, these students learned something from the pain of failure and struggle. They chose to turn the other way. The others, I might have saved them temporarily, but they didn't sense their need for salvation. They didn't understand why they needed saving. They didn't choose salvation, and therefore weren't actually changed by my help. Then the next quarter rolls around, and they're in the same position with low grades, and now an expectation to be superficially saved again. But they're not changed. So, choice has to be provided for all of us, including Thanos. The option to distort reality by claiming to be like God must be there. According to Genesis, humanity is made in God's image, fitted with an independent will. That will in nature is respected and valued by God in a very Kantian way when God offers a choice to humanity. Maui made a choice to steal the heart of Te Fiti. Moana made a choice to swim after Maui. Tony Stark makes a choice to build himself out of guilt. Woody chooses to remove Buzz, who was a threat to his position as Andy's toy. And finally, Thanos. He made a choice to define right and wrong because he believed his ethic, his worldview, was superior to God's. So, was Thanos wrong for snapping half of life out of existence? It depends on which moral framework you work from. But isn't that the danger? That we have allowed ourselves to generate and operate from various versions of right and wrong? It is easy and feels good to say that right and wrong just depends on culture perspective. I mean, this relativistic morality fits nicely with our sense of individualism and freedom. But it leads, in the end, to atrocity, to the devaluation of people. As the audience can tell, and Brolin said, Thanos is an intensely intelligent character. He has shown a universe-spanning problem. He has shown a possible solution, and he reaches for those infinity stones like fruit hanging from a tree. And ultimately, his act plainly reveals the depravity of a humanity that acts under the burden of knowledge, without the omniscience and wisdom of God. Under Thanos' self-generated ethic, life isn't valuable for itself, but only as a means to an end. But the Christian ethic turns everything on its head, and it says, submit your will to God, and trust that He will not be burdened by knowledge, and will have the wisdom to act and use you to shape reality. Of course, we live in a world where we accept that there's multiple truths, there's multiple narratives that explain the universe and our reality. It's interesting though, isn't that kind of thinking what got us into trouble in Genesis and in Infinity War in the first place? A being thinking they could define what was right and wrong on their own?